to stand up here. So I'm Linnea Spears-Lebrun. I'm a restoration ecologist. So what I do is design, implement, and monitor restoration projects across the West. I wanted to share a little story about why I do what I do. So I grew up in Florida. I'm one of 5 kids, and when I was like 8 or 9, I remember my mom, we would stop on the side of the road by this forest and get out the binoculars and check on a pair of bald eagles who were nesting. So we watched them over the season build their nest and have babies. And one day a sign popped up that said a neighborhood was going in. And I was absolutely devastated and asked, well, what are the eagles going to do? And my mom gently said, well, you know, they're going to knock down the trees, we'll have to move on. And that really, really stuck with me and became a guiding thing in my life. So I ended up getting a degree in environmental science and went to grad school for ecology. And kind of fell into restoration. That was just kind of the job I got after school, but it ended up being a really, really good fit. Because each site is kind of its own little experiment. So there's still a lot of science, a lot of data that you collect. But you can also see the impact that you have, right? You go back for 5 years to see if things are recovering, and you can see that you're making a difference. So I wanted to share some principles that I use in my projects and that are recommended by the Society of Ecological Restoration to do meaningful restoration. So the first one is engage stakeholders. So this is what we're doing here, right? We're trying to understand, what do people need, what do they want, what's going to work for them. The second, we talked about this a lot too, drawing on many types of knowledge. So incorporating traditional ecological knowledge, talking to landowners about what was there and what is possible. So the third is using a reference. So this could be a physical location. If there's somewhere that's still intact, that's working, you can say, this is what I want to recreate at my site, and use that information to help guide your restoration. Or it can just be, again, knowledge of what was, and using that as your reference. The fourth is restoring processes. So this, like we've talked about, is making healthy soils that hold together instead of just trying to get plants, right? You want to restore the whole process so that afterwards it's sort of self-sustaining and doesn't require a lot of maintaining to keep those the restoration in place. So a fifth, really important, clear goals so that you know if you've been successful. So in this world, we're talking about trying to keep soil where it is so that we're not putting dust on snow and causing all these issues with the water. So knowing ahead of time, like, that's our goal, and how do we measure that? And then making sure that you're collecting data that can answer that question. Are we being successful with what we're trying? So the sixth is trying to achieve the highest level of recovery possible. So depending on the setting and the stressors on the land, there's limitations to what you can do, but you want to try to get the highest ecological lift possible with your project. 7 is cumulative value. So again, we're looking at these big areas where dust is coming from. So being able to do this at scale to have a really big impact. And the last is that restoration is part of this continuum. So looking at ways to lessen the impact, so maybe changing land use, and then also restoring. So Christina set this up really well with, there's areas that need more intense restoration because they've already passed that threshold. And then some of the other ones that have, you know, more cover, 30% or more cover, you can do lesser interventions to get to the same place. And a big part of this, which we've also heard a little bit about today, is adaptive management. So this is the process where you plan, you talk to your stakeholders, you get your reference, you understand what your goals are, and what success looks like. Then you actually install the restoration, you know, do the soil treatments, put your plants in the ground. Then you need to monitor. So you're going to visit your site, you're going to collect that data, and then compare it to your goals and your success standards and say, is this working? Or are we kind of off track with what we were trying to do? And so that's the place where you would adapt, you would adjust, and go back and try something else. A different soil treatment, or, you know, different plant palette, and then start that cycle again, monitor and see if it's working. And just continue to adapt until you find things that work for your land and your site.
So, historically, this adaptive management, I love the adaptive management because I come from a world of environmental engineering where we want to control everything and make it like as individual and independent as it can be. But then that really limits our real world application. And adaptive management is such a good compromise there. So we don't have to wait until we have like cohesive study across the US about what works. But we just can look at what works in dryland areas, or we can look at what works regionally. And historically, we have largely ignored fungi, like on a whole. But they're mediating a lot. I said mediating, not meditating. We're not all on mushrooms. But real talk, I started this work because of my relationship with the land. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and I spent a lot of time meandering through oak openings and wildwood metro parks. And I just loved spending time outside with my dad. And then in college, or right as I was going to begin my college career, I learned about how companies can go out of business and leave complete messes just for someone else to clean up. And that made me understandably livid. So I wanted to figure out a way that I could turn this more into this. And the way that I was told was that you could turn this into this. You just didn't have the resources to pay for all the remediation work. And so that's what brought me to pay attention to fungal systems, because they are natural and self-sustaining, and they're everywhere, and they're mostly ignored. And then I moved out here to Southwest Colorado, and I learned that we have these problems, but we also have wildfire. And then we also have drought, and we have these dust events that come from soil instability. So I thought to myself, well, all of these are impacting the lands that I love, and my friends and my my community. So what do these all have in common, and could maybe something that's been ignored be brought in to maybe fix this? And you know, when you have a fungal, it's kind of a slippery slope, this like fungal flirtation. But I will convince you that we should all be concerned more with fungi. And you know that I say funga, and it's because my friends in the fungal sphere have rebranded fungus. We decided that, well, maybe fungus is just like, it has this icky connotation of like some plant mold that's killing your crops, or like a foot fungus. And it's just icky, and it just leaves you with a gross feeling. But now we are starting to uncover a little bit more about what these fungal systems can do, and we need a different word that's more reflective of the beauty of these landscapes that can be impacted by the fungi. So I noticed, well, you might notice as I go through my talk, that I chose all of these slides that are vaguely mycelial. And Most folks are familiar with the mushroom form. Like, raise your hand if you've eaten a mushroom or if you have opinions about not liking mushrooms on pizza. Yeah. So that's the reproductive structure of the fungus. And not all of them make that. Most of them spend a lot of their lifespan as thread-like structures that are exploring their environment, spitting out enzymes, and in improving food. Like, they just wait for the food to like come into their sphere. So when I say fungi, I want you guys to think about this structure, not the mushrooms so much, even though the mushrooms are very charismatic. And so I found that as I started to study these like climate, these big climate problems of wildfire and drought and soil instability and dust and snow, I learned that yes, like some lessons from pollution cleanup do translate to restoration efforts. And the ones that I took home from my adventures in microremediation were that microremediation works only if you use locally adapted fungi and you use them in a situation where they are set up to have food that they recognize. Then they can do their natural jobs, and when the fungi exist and are doing their natural jobs, then they restore the ecosystem functioning, and then it just, as a byproduct, as a fortuitous event, the pollution just gets cleaned up. And we can use these methods to restore soil structures too. And this is important because restoration efforts have ignored fungi, and not a lot is known about these non-wood rotting fungi, but ignoring them is not an option. So mycorrhizal fungi help support perennial grasses, and there are some that also help support dune grasses and make it possible for them to live directly on sand. They also bring nutrients and water, and they protect from toxins. They protect the plants from toxins. There are stories of, well, there are actually, I say stories, but they're really densely written articles in journals places. But let me summarize. These sunflowers work with fungi to allow them to tolerate really, really like toxic levels of metals in their tissues. And they would not be able to do that otherwise. And then they are also useful in fire mitigation. We can rot fire fuels and convert them into soil via a wood sponge transition period. So these rotting wood chips hold more soil on the landscape during this transition than just wood chips alone. And that goes into water security and soil stability. Rotting wood can hold up to 7 times its weight in water, and better structured soils hold water better too. And more specifically for drylands, we used to think that it's just plants plus biocrust make soil stability. And now we're learning that more of this is attributable to the abundance of fungi in these systems. And so the bottom line here is that we need to think like the fungi. We want to use local sources, local ecotypical, like strain-specific sources. So an oyster mushroom would work maybe if you got it from this environment, but it's not going to be a bougie like Washington like oyster mushroom that works here. But you need to feed them what they've evolved to eat, and you'll get pollutant removal. And similarly, if you think like the fungi with this context of soil stabilization. You want to use local sources, feed them what they've evolved to eat, and you'll get functioning ecosystems back. And now Linnea will introduce our program.
I'm going to share our grand vision here. So we were thinking with all of our expertise in restoration about a network of locations. We're calling them Field Stewards program that really connects or fills the gap between hardcore research stations and private landowners or tribal land. That would be stewards of the land. So the first, this is sort of a process that we want to recreate, these various sites. So the first thing would be selecting appropriate sites. So using all that research that the regional group was talking about to identify the source, those hot spots. And then also, as Christina mentioned, finding those places that are at risk of becoming sources of dust and addressing them as well. And then each site's going to be different, so we need to collect baseline condition information to really understand what the issues are at that specific location and what's possible for restoration there. Then come up with a plan, design what we're going to try to do and set our targets, our goals, what is success at this site. Carry out that restoration and monitor. And here we're also hoping to add dust monitoring components to each of these locations so that we can add to that data set as well. And then a really important part is sharing, right? Storytelling and getting out what worked and what didn't to other people in this program. So that could be on a panel or a regional agriculture conference or even a podcast, but some way of sharing what worked and what didn't.
And so we propose that our first site be a partnership through the Center for Earth Theology. And one of our group members, Heidi, has this land that's on the east side of Cortez. And it is, it's not directly a source that's contributing currently, but there, as we've learned today, there's a very small window where there's, it's like a very fine line between a source that is actively producing and a source that's at risk for producing dust. And so this land has a land use history that is very representative of the kinds of activities that we're trying to restore soils after. So in this specific first field steward situation, we've selected a site that's private land on the east side of Cortez that's representative of both common challenges and common activities that lead to dust. And then we go through the steps, and then we take a baseline condition where we interview the landowner and we assess concerns. Here she's concerned about erosion, invasive plant species. She's got a couple really dead trees on her land, and there's chunks of it that's actively eroding into Montgomery Creek. And so the next step is we'll plan to use the trees for soil stabilization. We'll rot them to increase the water holding capacity of the landscape so that water doesn't erode off the land as well. Then we'll plant native seeds and treat areas with various soil enrichments. And then we'll set targets. At this site, it's increasing native plant cover, expanding biological crusts, reducing erosion, and enhancing the microbial community. Then we'll restore and monitor this program, or this field site, where we actually go in and do the stuff that we planned. And then a key part is monitoring. So we'll check against our success standards, and we'll adapt the management. And then at the end, or maybe I'm interested to know like what y'all think about this. But I feel like storytelling is important throughout. It shouldn't be just at the end when like something works, because you're also not sharing like the 1,000 things that didn't work. So you could save a lot of headaches if you share those too. But I understand that like people are various degrees of private and reserved, and they might not want to like go talk on a panel. So in that case, they could like talk with storytellers or hire some of us, or the program could hire some of us to tell their story for them on a podcast episode or some other form of media.